So now that we know how to add and subtract, let's go ahead and learn how to multiply complex numbers. Then we will learn about something called complex conjugates in the process. So there is a somewhat difficult formula for finding the product of two complex numbers. Don't memorize it, just FOIL it. And then remember that I squared equals -1. So if we want to multiply these two complex numbers, let's just FOIL. So first would be 2 times 3. Then outside would be 16i. Inside would be the 5i times 3. And then lastly, we would have 5i times 8i, which would be 40i squared. So that will be 6 plus, now 16i and 15i, that is 31i, and then we have 40i squared, but we know I squared is -1. So we have 6 plus 31i minus 40. But we have like terms. We have 6 and -40 give us -34. So -34 plus 31i. So let's FOIL this out. First, outside, inside. Last will be -28i squared. Collecting like terms, we have 10, and then 8i minus 35i is 27i. Then we have minus 28i squared, but I squared is -1. So we have 10 minus 27i plus 28. So we have 38 minus 27i. So now let's look at the square of a complex number. We have 3 plus 5i. Now the thing to do here is not square the 3 and square the 5i. That will not work. We have to remember what it means to square a number. It means to multiply by itself. So 3 plus 5i times 3 plus 5i. So let's go ahead and FOIL that. We have 9, and then the outside would be 15i. Inside would be the same thing. And then lastly, we would have 25i squared. So we have 9 plus 30i plus 25, and I squared is -1. So we have 9 plus 30i minus 25, which is going to be -16 plus 30i. But I want you to notice here is that taking a complex number and multiplying by itself, we still have an I present. Okay, so now I want you to try this one. So go ahead and pause the video and see what happens if you multiply these two. So go ahead and FOIL these out. The first will be 9 because 3 times 3. Outside will be -15i. Inside will be +15i. And then finally, we have minus 25i squared. So we have 9. And then you'll notice that the -15i plus the 15i, that's just 0. So we have 9 minus 25i squared. but I squared is negative 1. So that's 9 plus 25 equals 34. The thing to note here is that whenever I take 3 plus 5i times 3 minus 5i, that's a lot like a plus b times a minus b, which we remember from algebra yields the difference of squares. But in this case, we have a sum of squares, and that's because we have the i's present. This leads to an important conversation about complex conjugates. So whenever you have two complex numbers, and the only thing that is different between the two complex numbers is the sign in between them, so a plus bi and a minus bi, those are complex conjugates. So if we have 8 plus 3i and we want to state the complex conjugate, the conjugate will be 8 minus 3i. If we have 2/3 minus the square root of 3 over 4i, the complex conjugate is 2/3 plus the square root of 3 over 4i. So as we said, if we take a complex number and we multiply by its conjugate, we get a sum of squares. Now you don't actually have to memorize that. We can just FOIL as before and it will always turn out to be this result. The key thing to remember is that if we multiply a number by its complex conjugate, we will obtain a number that has no I in it. This is real. There is no imaginary component to it. So let's take a look at multiplying some complex numbers by their conjugates. So 2 plus 5i times 2 minus 5i, you can FOIL it out or use this trick from above. So go ahead and pause the video and try 2 plus 5i times 2 minus 5i and see what you obtain. So if we do this, the real part is 2. So we have 2 squared plus the imaginary part is 5 squared, then will be 4 plus 25, which will be 29. Or it would have been okay if you had FOILed it instead, and you would have obtained first, outside, inside, last, which would have been 4 minus 25 times negative 1, which is 29. So either way is acceptable. So now let's look at 1/2 minus the square root of 3 over 2i times its conjugate. Pause the video and try this one out. So we have, using the trick, the real part squared plus the imaginary part squared. So we have 1/4 plus 3/4, which is just 1. Or you could have FOILed it out yet again, and you would have obtained the same thing.